Hey, Composing Gloves here, and today we're going to be talking about phrases. We're going to start with motifs though. So I'm just going to throw it down right now that I'm not really going to go super crazy in depth into melodic writing and then counterpoint and part writing and all those types of things, simply because it is something that is I'll pull myself in the direction I don't want to go. If we focus on chord progressions and stuff, I'm willing to bet that'll get people a lot closer to what they're looking to do. So I've written out a little piece, and to start off, first let's define what a phrase is. Well, let's define what a motif is. A motif is the smallest identifiable musical idea. So if you can identify that as a musical idea, you've got yourself a motif. Motifs are the things that you develop. Those are the things that you go throughout your piece and you change, you manipulate, you present it in a new way to the listener. A phrase is an independent melodic idea, and it is terminated, it's ended by a cadence. So when you arrive at a cadence, phrase is over. So you can, however, you can have like checkpoint cadences to complete an overarching phrase. Pieces of a phrase are called, I believe it's called subphrase, the subphrase. So it's simply like you just take a piece of that phrase, and then if there's stuff inside that, that would be the motif, like inside the phrase. Unless you have subphrases and subphrases, then it's like you just chose a really big phrase, then it's like whatever. So I've written out a thing here. Now I have the question that I'm going to try and address in this tutorial as well, which is how do I write multiple phrases that doesn't sound like corny and dumb? And I know this all the time because I know this all the time. Whatever the heck that sentence was about. I understand this because I used to do this all the time. That's what I meant to say. Because when you're brand new, it's like difficult. Even when you have some knowledge, it's difficult to see until once you get into like advanced chord progressions, it becomes much easier. That's why I want to get into chord progressions. But with our knowledge of chords as we have right now and our knowledge of cadences, we are prepared to sort of venture off into the world of composition a little bit. So here I have a line. This is a piece I just wrote. It's in A minor. It goes... And they're 8-bar phrases. So every 4 bars, there's some sort of like little checkpoint. And then on the 8-bar, that's our large, like the phrase is complete. So for example, here the phrase is complete. You can very clearly see I've got an E major to a minor. So it's a 5-1. So that's the authentic cadence right there. So that's something that it's just a thing. So like this should be registering bells from before. I will give you a couple rules about melodic writing, or guidelines. Now let's talk about these guidelines. These guidelines will help you write, sort of safe melodies, and then you can venture from there into other areas. But there are names for all sorts of tricks and stuff you can do. So one of them is, especially when you're writing for voice. Now this doesn't necessarily apply. Hey, where's my thingy? There it is. Okay, so when you're writing, you generally don't want to write jumps in your melody that are larger than an octave. So don't do that. There are melodies that have that, of course. It's like it can be a thing, and there are famous melodies that use the octave, like for example, Over the Rainbow. Somewhere over the rainbow, that one. So that one is a famous one, but however, you generally want to stay below an octave, especially if you're going to give it to performers. You should be aware of any shortcomings of the player or difficulties on their instrument. For example, clarinet has the throat tone range, which is easy, but the tones are hard to get sounding good. So even though they're easy to play, good players generally don't like to play them because they are much more difficult to get a good sounding tone out of it. And then right above the throat tone, there's a register jump. So like before, you have no fingers, all of a sudden all your fingers go down and you have to blow way harder to get that note out. And for young players, this could be a real problem. So if you're writing for young players, if you're writing for like high school, they'll be fine. Like if they can't do that, which there are definitely high school bands that are that bad that they can't do that, then they need to like fund something else because their band program's not going anywhere right now. Unless they're new. But if they're a senior and they've been in band the whole time, they still can't do that, that's a problem. And then there's the 4th octave on clarinet, which is outrageous, which taunts college students to try and master that if they want to be professional, because that when you're professional, you're just like, oh yeah, I can play every note, period. Like it doesn't even matter, just give me the note. So you need to be aware of these difficulties when you're writing out parts. That's just an example. On piano, for example, you don't want to be writing parts with hands crossing in all sorts of weird ways. You want to write it in a way that's easier to interpret, especially in the case of piano. Okay, another rule is when you're writing out notes, you generally want your chord, you want to outline chords. So you written out, sometimes you write the melody out and then you write your chords to harmonize with it. Sometimes you write your chords first and then, which is what I did in this case. Actually, it's kind of 50-50. I did chords and then melody. And then once I added melody, then I continued on my melodic idea. I just picked the chords that would go with it. I knew I wanted to keep it simple because for this, and this is, for some of you guys, this may be the first time you've ever looked at something like this. Hopefully not. And so when you're writing out melodies, you want to generally stick to the chord tones, like I just said, and you want to stick to them on the strong beats. You can leave the chord tones, and there's all sorts of names for things like that. Passing tones, neighboring tones. You can get into a way cool chromatic stuff, which is part of the neighboring tone thing. And so this is so you'll notice here that I stayed to it, but here this D is not in an A minor chord, but it's not on a strong beat. On the strong beats, I have chord tones. I'm not sure if I stick through that through the whole thing, but I tried to. And I wasn't holding myself to any sort of like rigid standard. I was like, let's write some music for this thing, for phrases. Woo, phrases. So, okay, with all that put aside, there's one other thing. When you write a jump over a fourth, at least I know it's the case with the voice, you generally want to do this. When you write a jump and then the jump is bigger than a fourth, so you jump up a fourth, so you go from like C up to an F, you want to jump in the opposite direction. So if you went up a fourth, you want to jump back down by some amount. It doesn't have to be a fourth back down, but you generally want to go back down. You can progress up, but generally when jumps are that big, it's easier to go back down a little bit and then continue ascending. That's like one of the rules of melody writing. You also generally only want to have like one peak in your melody, one highest note. So there's like my highest note for this phrase. And then this phrase, it would be this B right here. But this has a special name too. This is something special too, but we're not going to talk about that. We're going to just talk about phrases. So all that other stuff aside, I'm just trying to make you aware of it so that later on in the future, I'll probably have videos on it. But for right now, we're going to be moving into chords, because if you understand how to write really cool chord progressions, the melodies will be easy. Now, another thing that we didn't really talk about is, well, we're going to talk about it now. So a motif can be rhythmically identifiable, or you can identify it with the pitches. A great example of a master motif is Beethoven's Fifth, dun 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 dun, because we all have the pitches in the rhythm. It's like the motif of like motifs. Like, what a great motif. So when you combine these into larger schemes and you make phrases, it becomes a really dynamic piece. So here I've got sort of a motif. I got this like ascending eighth to a quarter note thing, but I sort of throw it out here and adopt a new idea. And so these are independent. So a phrase is an independent melodic idea that terminates at a cadence. So here's an independent idea. Here's another independent idea. And later I can develop them and move them on and do all sorts of cool things. And then once I start developing, I'll begin to emerge with motifs and things. But for now, this is what I got. So let me play it for you. I finally figured out how to get contact to work with this. I did a little bit of homework and got it going. And I'm learning. I am much more proficient than I was a couple days ago at this. So, okay, we're going to start right here at the beginning. And I'll let you do the chord analysis, but you'll notice there's cadence. Here's the authentic cadence. And I pull a little chromatic move to go from the minor fifth to the major fifth. Oh, no, wait. Yeah, this is the leading tone. It's a half step, okay, to A. I really like this part. Moral of the story. So we go E minor to E major, and the G sharp happens to go right into A. That's what I'm trying to say. Okay, now let's give it a listen. And this is for the phrase. So here's one phrase, here's the other phrase, and look for it. Da-da-da. Here we go. there's a couple things in here we haven't covered yet. For example, this is a ritardando. It just means slow down. And this is a great example of an authentic cadence that does slow down, like I was talking about earlier. And it lands on the strong beat. The chord calls is just, I really like the ending. I like this thing over here. This is a fifth. So this is a 5-1. So another authentic cadence to sort of end it. And then I just start anew at another 1. And so I just go 1-1 here. And that's that. I mean, honestly, you just write out a cool chord progression. You come up with your melody. And then the rhythm, I've been throwing rhythm out of the window a little bit because I want you to be focusing on the harmonic relationships, because those are the ones that really throw people off. Because after you have that, now rhythm is starting to become more of an element in what we're doing. But that's that. I mean, it's pretty simple idea. This is the phrase. And writing the dynamic phrase comes from, for creating multiple phrases, you know, that sound good. It comes from being able to see how your chord progressions are going to line up, and the idea of theme with that. So we have one, I would consider both these phrases pretty strong phrases that like could be very singable, and the easily developable. You could develop it easily. You could easily get much grander and bigger. And I have room now to alter these chords and make it a much more complex thing. Some people try to go for the complex thing right out of the gate. And you know, that's okay. That's the thing you can do. However, you can write something like this and then make it more interesting as you go. You don't want to kill it with just complexity. That's another thing that people tend to do, is they just get way too complex, way too fast. Where it's like, dude, man, bro, back up like 12 steps and go ahead and, you know, make it complex from there. Add alterations, add ninths, add 13, sevenths, you know, do stuff to make it cool. But geez Louise, man, bro, like, take it easy. That's how, at least at the beginning when I was starting out, that was something that I had a problem with, was just writing way too phrases that were like impossible to play. I was not looking at harmonic structures like I should have been. So yeah, you'll notice here I've got this dun 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 dun. So it like leads into the chords, and then I also try to voice the chords in the way what notes I choose to play. Here I've got a couple times where my tones pass or I change chords in the measure, but I generally try to keep it one chord per measure. That is by no means like a law though. Yeah, so that's phrases in a nutshell. So there's two phrases. So here's the first phrase. That's the first phrase, and I think it sounds great. Granted, I didn't play it in time at all. This would be an idea of like how the pitch relates to you when I start to mess with the rhythm like that. But yeah, that's that. It's phrases. I'm not really sure what else to say. You just write them out, follow some of those guidelines. The better you get at seeing where the guidelines can break, and the better you get at seeing where you can change where the chords land, the much better you'll get at creating dynamic chord progressions and melodies. After this, it just becomes sort of a game of vocabulary, and you add more and more tools to your kit until you're like writing freaking anything you want and really fast. Like, if you think about this, Mozart, he was writing it all out by hand. This man, he would have written like a billion more pieces if he had something like this. He would have put everyone to shame with just the amount that he would have written. If you have any questions about phrases, let me know. We haven't talked about key changes yet, which can also add dynamic interest, repeats, types of repetition, all that kind of stuff. That stuff I just am not going to approach for a while, because I want to go through a bunch of chord progressions and just get people up and running with that. Subscribe and have a blessed day. So I still want there to be a bass tone in there. So now we play it.